At this time of great uncertainty, many of our normal routines and regular patterns of life are being challenged. The food and farming sector is no exception. If we are to harvest British fruit and vegetables this year, we need an army of people to help. Food does not happen by magic.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Backstory. I'm your host, Dana Lewis. That familiar voice was Prince Charles, who was called for an army of people to find jobs on the UK's fruit and vegetable farms because they are desperately short of people to pick this year's crops. Closed European borders, people sick from COVID-19. That all makes for a dire harvest. And it's a similar story from Europe to Canada and America and on to Asia. In this, our latest edition of Backstory, the delicate international food supply chain is rattled, and some might say very near broken. Caitlin Welsh is the director of the Global Food Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Dana.
As we speak, Prince Charles in the UK is asking people, as in wartime, to go and pick food before it spoils in the fields. What's happening to labor and the flow of workers worldwide in this pandemic, if you can just kind of paint a general picture?
Sure. I think that's a great question, a great place to start. What we're seeing right now is a food crisis on a global scale, and it's not due to the fact that there's not enough food available worldwide. It's due to disruptions across different aspects of food systems. And that request by Prince Charles, to me, pinpoints access to food with harvesting food, and the particular issue there could have to do with availability of labor. One thing that we're seeing worldwide is disruptions in labor flows. So that could be one of the reasons that Prince Charles made that request. And also, I think that he's probably doing that to reduce the amount of food loss and waste worldwide. It was already very high before the pandemic, but we're seeing, because supply chains, they're very, very efficient. They're not flexible though. And when, for a variety of reasons, farmers are not able to reach markets, what we're seeing is huge amounts of food lost, unfortunately, with
I want to talk to you about that.
Hungry people.
French fishermen say they're throwing back 2/3 of their catch. Australia is facing an avocado glut. A farmer in Ontario, Canada, now feeds some of his milk back to his cows. But there is a limit to what can be recycled. Most of what cannot be sold will be wasted. Millions of liters of keg beer is going stale. The EU is expecting to lose $430 million worth of potatoes. So America's food waste ratio, where you are, is set to rise 30 to 40% this year. I mean, these are huge problems.
They really are. And again, they were problems before the pandemic, and they're actually worse right now. I'll give you some more examples of what we're seeing in the United States. There was one chicken processing company that killed 2 million chickens in April. We had another that smashed 750,000 of eggs in 1 week. I think one of the biggest tragedies is with farmers who raise animals having to cull their herds, so essentially kill the animals because they can't send them to meat processing plants. And so we're seeing that in the tens of thousands per week across the U.S. So what's happening there is there's a couple of things. One of the main things is that in March and into April, orders from restaurants, and not just restaurants, but other places where people gathered to eat, so sports arenas, cafeterias at universities, public spaces generally, those orders fell off of a cliff as people were no longer able to gather. So farmers who are raising animals and growing crops for those for those establishments no longer had markets for their goods, so they were forced to and they couldn't adjust quickly enough. They couldn't pivot, and so they had no choice but to waste their food, to destroy their product.
Why do they have to cull beef or cull chickens or cull pigs? Why is that? Because they cannot get the seed, or they cannot afford to keep those animals longer without sending them to a meat processing plant, or what is the problem?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. One of them is that when it comes to pig supply chains in particular, farmers who raise pigs don't invest in enough space to keep pigs. They're used to large amounts of product flowing through, so they'll raise them till they get to a certain size, and then once they reach a certain size, then they'll ship them off to be to the meat packing plants to be processed for consumption. But when the meat processing plants can no longer take them, it means that the pigs continue to grow in size, and farmers simply don't have space to keep them, and are forced. And again, one thing that's very important is that farmers don't want to be making this decision. They're invested in their product, and they're doing this only by necessity right now.
And yet you have meat shortages in some supermarkets in America. Why is that?
You're seeing that because the meat processing plants are being taken offline, and that is because not because of there's a problem inherent to the meat processing plant. It's because of worker illness. And I think that that's one of the most important things. That's been a problem in the U.S. meat industry for decades. But the reason that meat processing plants are being taken offline is because of high rates of illness. We're even seeing death because of COVID-19. Almost 15,000 meat workers had been infected with coronavirus in meatpacking facilities across the United States, and that's across 31 states. So this is a nationwide problem. We've known about this for several weeks, hundreds of cases in the Panhandle in Texas. So it's because meat worker illness at meat packing plants is taking those offline, and then just back up a few steps from there. And farmers who raise animals to send to those facilities are no longer able to send them there.
I mean, obviously you couldn't see this exact situation coming, but could you see the danger over the last 20 years of increased concentration of farms? I mean, America's poultry market, for instance, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe is controlled by just 4 companies. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, not only that, but I believe 90% of chickens raised in the United States are part of vertical integration, meaning that the farmers that raise them don't actually own them. They don't sell them. They raise them to sell them to other processors. I think that's an example of what you're talking about. What we're seeing in the United States is that we have an incredibly efficient food system, but that efficiency has come at the cost of flexibility. So that when you have disruptions like the ones we're seeing today, producers are unable to pivot to shift their products to other markets. So, for example, you have farmers and ranchers raising their product to sell to a very specific consumer. So that consumer might be a specific restaurant or a specific type of restaurant. And when that restaurant no longer can take in an order, those producers are not able to pivot so they can sell the product to a different consumer, like to grocery stores. And that's because you have different packaging needs at different outlets. It's because you have different labeling needs at different outlets. For example, if you are raising a particular prime cut of beef that a restaurant can no longer take, the producer is unable to grind that beef to send it to a grocery store. You just simply have very, very specialized supply chains that are again, very, very efficient, but unable but that are inflexible.
Is this a disruption, a bump on the road, or are we in a spiral of the food supply chain?
I think that we're not out of the woods yet. I think that things will start to get better slowly. We're seeing hunger unprecedented in modern times in the United States, alongside images of mass food loss and waste. I think that the public is aware of this crisis in a way that they haven't been recently. And so I'd be surprised if we don't take a hard look at our food systems and that things don't change after this, particularly regarding worker health.
I mean, a lot of people, when they think of hunger, think of third world. They do not think of America.
Yeah. So we're seeing shocking rates of hunger here. It's not because there's not enough food available. It's because disruptions all across the system. And it's also because of the economic downturn generally. And that's one of the main reasons for food insecurity in the United States and worldwide. But you have an economic downturn, and the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, said that this downturn, the scope and speed of this downturn are without modern precedent. And so, of course, you're going to see food insecurity without precedent. One of the most shocking statistics that came out of a study that was released last week by the Brookings Institution found that in 1 in 5 households where there are children 12 and under, and 1 in 5, the children were experiencing food insecurity. And the researchers concluded that young children are experiencing food insecurity to an extent unprecedented in modern times.
Around the world, it must be much worse than that, depending on where you are.
Exactly, depending on where you are. Before the pandemic, there are a couple indicators. We had 820 million people, around 820 million, who were chronically undernourished. So that's a very high baseline to start with before the pandemic. That was an estimate by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and some others. The UN World Food Program had estimated before the pandemic that in addition, there were about 130 million people who are at risk of sudden shocks to food security. So at risk of just, for different reasons, being thrown into food insecurity. That was before the pandemic. Since the pandemic.
The UN, I have another statistic. The UN estimates economic fallout from COVID-19 could see the number of people suffering from acute hunger double to over 265 million this year. Does that kind of jive with what you've heard?
It does. That's exactly where I was going. So before the pandemic, they estimate 130 million. And then because of the pandemic, they estimate that the number of people that could be thrown into food insecurity could double to 265 million. Acute food insecurity, just because of sudden shocks related to the pandemic.
And all of this is internationally now tied together, right? It's not that you domestically produce food and sell domestically. Often Ukrainian wheat, for instance, milled to flour in Turkey, turned to noodles in China. I mean, a lot of the food supply is linked.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Global trade is essential to food security for countries around the world. United States, for example, we rely on imports to meet about 15% of our domestic food needs. That proportion is much higher in developing countries where their agriculture sectors are not as advanced. So developing countries are much more susceptible to shocks in global trade. What we're seeing right now is about 15 countries have limited exports of their own food so that they can, in an effort to meet their own domestic food needs. Policy analyses show that those aren't actually are not effective measures. But what we're hoping is that number does not rise and that it actually decreases.
That becomes a very serious situation if you have countries saying we're not going to export food. We're going to keep it for domestic consumption in a crisis. It
absolutely does. The last time that there was a major global food crisis was about 12 years ago. It was 2007 and 2008. And at that time, about 33 countries put export restrictions in place. And that the effect of that was that it increased food prices such that it threw about 40 million more people into food insecurity because of those export restrictions. At that time, about 12 years ago, in 2007, 2008, there were about 45 countries that experienced riots worldwide, some of which led to political change. Again, right now in the United States and worldwide, the crisis is not because there's not enough food available, but it's because of shocks across the system for all the things that we're mentioning, for food processing, sales, economic downturn, reducing individuals' ability to purchase food, et cetera.
Caitlin, great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
All right, Steve Groff joins me now from southeastern Pennsylvania. He is a farmer. He has tomatoes and spaghetti squash and other things, but he also, and probably more importantly for us, lectures on farming. He's been all over the world. He's written a book called The Future Proof Farm. And Steve, I think you may have to rewrite it after COVID-19.
Well, it's kind of timely in a way. When I wrote this book, I had no idea that COVID-19 was coming on, but The Future Proof Farm has to do with how we grow our food. And a big component of it is trying to think about increasing the nutrient density or the nutrients and vitamins that are actually in our food. And that occurs the way we grow it. And so actually the book is very timely, but as you said, Dana, I am thinking about writing a follow-up here at some point.
Farmers are saying it's a bloodbath in terms of food production. I mean, really all over the world, people are facing incredible challenges. But in the wake of COVID-19, America, which has a $100 billion farm economy, has got some deep troubles.
Well, there's some chinks in the armor have come to light because of COVID-19. And it's all because of our just-in-time food supply system. And because of the workers, it's actually the human component of that. And that's what we heard all about the meat shortages. It's because there are humans, there are people that need to be in the processing factories to be able to do that. So obviously that creates some challenges. Either the people get sick or they're afraid to come to work. And you just can't do the assembly line when you have key people missing. And
What does it mean? What does it mean? Just-in-time food supply line.
Let's just take vegetables for example. We grow the vegetables, and they're ripe during a certain period of time. Their shelf life is very small, and so you harvest them a few days before they're ripe, and then they have to be processed and packaged. That takes human effort in almost all cases, and then they get delivered to the stores. So from the time a product is harvested till it gets to the stores is a matter of days. And then if you have in the middle of that, if you have a section of that or that doesn't allow for humans, who will say in this case, to do the processing, well, then it's either ceased or stopped. And then by that time, the tomatoes may rot because they don't stay for 3 or 4 weeks. And so then we don't have them. And that's part of it. The other aspect is food service, restaurants, schools, businesses even, is 50% of the use of food. And the way food is directed for food service is different than it is to grocery stores. It's different packaging, different sizes, even different varieties. I grow specific varieties of butternut squash for grocery stores and other varieties of butternut squash for restaurants.
Okay, well, let's just stop there for a second, because restaurants, you're saying that's 50%. I mean, that market just collapsed.
It did. So you would think, well, okay, people have to eat, so you can automatically just switch to food, and instead of going to a restaurant, it just goes to a grocery store. Well, it's not that simple, because as I said, packaging and sizes and a whole host of things. There's a few things that can go to both end users, but not a lot. And that's why we see in that system farmers saying that they have to plow these crops under, which I mean is horrendous given the fact that there are food shortages. It is, and it's all because of between the farmer and the end user. That's the problem.
So how should that change? I mean, is this a wake-up call? Is there something positive that comes out of this?
Yes, there certainly is. And I think moving forward, we're going to have to consider more of the direct marketing, the farmers to sell more directly to consumers. And I would encourage consumers to seek out farmers who are able to sell directly. And I'm a small farmer myself, so anytime that I can be more direct to consumer, that may even put a bigger share of the dollar, we'll say, into my pocket, and people can get it more directly as well. So I think the uptick in interest of locally grown, for instance, I think will continue. That's not going to serve all our food needs, and that's not the point. The point is we need to be aware of some of these safeguards that we probably need to be putting in place here, and going more direct to the farmers is definitely one of those safeguards.
Do you think the federal government saying things like they want to stop food at the border, they want to keep it inside the United States is a good thing? Or is that kind of protectionism a dangerous thing?
It's a two-way street. As we've always said for a while, it's a small world out there, and I guess, like it or not, we do need to rely on some other nations that are close. But that being said, I think this COVID-19 has also brought up the fact that we do need don't outsource too much, I guess. So I would be a big proponent of doing as local as possible, and that means even from a national perspective. We can grow plenty of food. It's not a food shortage as far as growing it. It's the system that is not serving us well right now.
My mother originally came from Western Canada, from Saskatchewan, and I've been up there where there were huge wheat farming. And I know, I grew up on a cow farm, but I know from the wheat farmers that you just don't plant a crop 1 year in advance. I mean, you were doing rotation crops, and you were planning far into the future, at least 3 years anyway, when you're doing farm leases. What does this suddenly do to everyone? How does a farmer plan now for next year? They must put everybody upside down, and how does that translate into the food chain?
Yeah, I think we're all thinking about that. My son and I, who farms, my son farms with me here. We've been discussing that here right now, short term, and we are actually trying to focus more on the grocery stores. And we're actually changing up some varieties here at the last minute because we still have time to do that. Our planting window has not closed yet. So we're trying to adjust like for the near term, which the near term for us is 3 or 4 months. But as we move forward, there's still so many unknowns out there of now it's not so much of how steep is the curve going to be. I think we've flattened the curve, if you will. Now it's how will the reopening work? How's the timeline? And what will come out of this? Obviously, there's political influences at play right now that we feel like it's hard to have any control over. So it's more of a day-to-day thing or week-to-week thing now, Dana, as we move forward.
Is it going to hit the consumer? Is it going to hit the consumer?
Well,
are you going to see it on the grocery shelves?
I think we will in some form or fashion. I just saw this morning that there were some restaurants that opened up. They're putting a COVID-19 surcharge on the bottom of their bill. And it was like, of course, the customers aren't too thrilled about that. And I myself am thinking, wow, I don't think that's going to fly. But it'll probably, I guarantee you the price of food is not going down. How far
are we going to have enough? Are we going to have enough?
Yes. I think we will. That to me, I'm not afraid of. We can grow the product. There could be some labor shortage. Actually, I'm suffering that a little bit now and getting my labor. I think I'll be getting it on time for June, July, and August when I'm busiest. But they're not here yet, and it is a somewhat of a challenge in that end of it. But I'm not too concerned about a shortage of food. I'm concerned more about the supply chain and how that's going to work out.
When you say they're not here yet, who are they? Where are they coming from? And will they come?
Right. So I use the United States H-2A program, which is the legal way to bring in foreign workers. I've been doing that for the last 16 years, I guess now. It worked very well.
Are they coming from outside the U.S.?
Yes, the ones I am getting are from the country of Thailand. So they are right now. There's being delayed because the embassy was shut down, where they need to get their visas. So we're waiting for that. But it hasn't impacted me dramatically yet. But it will if there's further delays. So
where are they going to sleep? You obviously have housing there for them. Yeah. How many do you have in a room? And it must change all of that.
Yeah, we have housing here, and we have gotten some of the updated requirements of that. And to this point, it's something I believe we can handle. I guess I'm always aware that things change weekly here, and this is more of a political thing. The Department of Labor sets those standards and so forth. So we're just going to have to roll with it. And I would just say, if regulations come on us that are onerous, that just force us to, increase our costs or whatever that means, it's going to have to be passed on.
And I guess when they talk about people going hungry, even if you have farmers that have product, if prices increase, there are a lot of people that unfortunately will not be able to afford this stuff. And a lot of it doesn't get to food banks.
I have been involved with food banks anyway, so I kind of have that channel already open. I don't expect, thank you. But I don't expect high, just super high, double the price of food. I don't expect that. But I do expect some prices to come up on the retail side. On the farmer side, we just don't know. I think, like you said, grain farmers right now, it's not good. It's not looking good. The futures are not good. There's so many uncertainties out there that we just don't know, what's going to happen until the end of this year and in the next.
Steve Groff, the author of the book called The Future Proof Farm, which is getting to be very difficult to future-proof yourself in this situation. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Dana. My pleasure.
The food crisis has already spilled over into kitchens. A recent poll in Britain shows over half the people are valuing food more, with 48% say they're throwing away less food. Of those wasting less, people say they're planning meals more carefully, and they're getting a lot better at using leftovers. Shopping habits have shifted too. A quarter of the people surveyed say they're getting better at buying quality food as they're not going out and spending money on other things. While more than a third of the people are supporting smaller local business more than ever before. And a further 42% say they're not buying takeaways because money is tight. That's another edition of Backstory. Please share our link and subscribe to the podcast feed. I'm Dana Lewis. Thanks for listening to Backstory.